Hey guys, welcome back. So, as always, I'd like to start with a massive thank you to all of you who are liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you can do this with this video, it'd be much appreciated. So, some of you may be familiar with this story. For those of you who are not, then buckle in because this story goes through a lot of twists and turns and just basically turns into an absolute fiasco, and they turn it into almost what you would see on a soap. So I will be talking about the story of Amy Fisher and just the what it was distracted from. So a story, as always, coming from abuse and being abused to turn it into an absolute media fiasco. And while Amy was the culprit in this story, I don't think she would have gone ahead and maybe done the damage that she did if it wasn't for the input of the man who had taken advantage of her. So, with that being said, we are going to look into the life and crime of Amy Fisher. So, Amy Elizabeth Fisher, she was born on August 21st, 1974, and she was born in Merrick in New York City. And her parents were Elliot Fisher and Roseanne Fisher. Um, Amy was actually their only child that was born to the couple. So Elliot and Roseanne had met when Roseanne had begun working for him. So Elliot owned various businesses around New York, and she was only 19 at the time and he was 36. So they later married, and Roseanne became Elliot's third wife at this point. Growing up, Amy was said to have been really, really shy, but quite a tough tomboy sort of girl. And she was said to have been really, really street smart. The family were financially stable. Obviously, like I said, Elliot owned various businesses. And Amy was said to have been treated to new clothes and grown up new cars as and when she wanted. Amy said that growing up, though, she did feel really sad and lonely. And said that she had close bonds with her grandmother and her aunt. And Amy said that growing up, Elliot was verbally and physically abusive towards her. And when her parents argued, that she hoped that they were on the verge of getting a divorce. She also said that she was sexually abused by a close family friend. And this started when she was only 3 years old. And this abuse, it carried on for a further 3 years, to up to the point that she turned 6. And when she was 13, Amy said that she was raped by a workman in her own house. So as you can see, obviously, while this wasn't put forward in a lot of cases, this is stuff that I definitely didn't know at this point. I was familiar with this story, but there's a lot of information that I recently found out while doing my research, and this was one of them. I didn't have any idea about Amy's backstory. So Amy, she apparently grew up having aspirations of becoming a fashion designer and going to college to study fashion. The neighbours said that they would often see Amy walking her little Yorkshire Terrier Muffin, and that she just seemed like all the other teenage girls that you would see out and about. But at school, Amy, during her teenage years, she started getting into a lot of trouble. This is on a regular basis with her boyfriend, so she was bunking school quite a lot with her to spend time with her boyfriend. And on one particular day, she got into a fist fight with an older girl, and this resulted in Amy's nose and jaw actually getting broken. In February 1991, Amy, she then runs away from home after a row with her mother, So at this point, Amy is now 16 years old, and this was apparently after Amy had asked if she could stay at her friend's house, and her father reportedly took the phone away from her mother and threatened to beat Amy if she came home. And Amy then said that she spent the next few days after this with her friends and other family members. But reportedly, within these few days, Elliot then filed a missing persons report with the police. He said that Amy was uncontrollable and she was mentally unstable, violent, and dangerous. And eventually, Amy did go home, and she actually finds out she's pregnant at this point. So, like I said, she's 16-year-old schoolgirl getting into a bit of trouble, being, as we all were at that age, when you're in a relationship, that sort of becomes your life, and you want to spend every waking moment with that person, especially obviously if they don't go to the same school as you. So I can only assume that this boy was a little bit older than her at this point. And so she finds out she's pregnant and she turns to her aunt for any advice, and her aunt actually helps her into getting an abortion. So this stress of the abortion, it really weighs on Amy's mind, and one day she decides to go for a drive to clear her mind. So as she's sort of backing out of the garage, she accidentally knocks off one of her wind mirrors, and Amy takes the car to a mechanic's called Complete Auto Body and Fencing, and this is in Baldwin, New York. Now, Amy recalls that she had been to the shop numerous times with her father, but he had hung on in, had hung on in the sidelines, and she basically let her father do the talking. But in May 1991, she was now by herself, 16 years old, probably one of her first cars, and she's gone to this shop to obviously seek out any help in getting the repairs before her father finds out. And this is when she meets Joey Buttafuoco for the first time, and what leads to the course of events that changes not only Amy's life but Joey's life, changes her life as well. So Joey Buttafuoco, he was married March the 11th, 1956. So already, as we can tell, 20-year age gap between him and Amy. I can't stress enough that this girl was only 16 years old when she met Joey, and he was in his mid-30s. And while we can appreciate in the UK, even though it'd be frowned upon, it'll be perfectly legal. But don't forget, obviously in America, the legal age of consent and legal age of leaving school is 18. So in the eyes of American law, Amy was still classed as a child at this point. So he was born and raised in Massapequa, Long Island, and reportedly his mother died when he was only 11 years old. And this was said to have struggled with the grief for the further remainder of his teenage years, which you can kind of understand. Losing your mum at that young of an age is going to take some sort of impact. In 1971, during what's called the sophomore year in America, Joey meets Mary Jo Connolly. She was born May 15th, 1955, and she was the oldest of 5 sisters. And the pair then started seeing each other, and they become high school sweethearts. And Joey, he was described as a bit rascally, but a really charming and funny guy. But soon he developed a reputation as a troublemaker, which Joey said was him acting out because of the grief of losing his mother. Joey and Mary Jo, they then got married after they had left school, and they buy a house in Baldwin, and this was basically close to the auto body shop that was owned by Joey's father at the time, who Joey later inherited. So after the birth of their first child, Paul, Mary Jo said it soon felt like the more responsible that she became, the more irresponsible Joey started becoming. She said that while she was at home with her son, Joey was either at work or still trying to live like a party boy lifestyle, and he developed a really serious cocaine habit at this time. And sometimes he would leave for work and not return until the next morning, and sometimes even returning 2 days later. He was using the excuse that he had fell asleep in the shop and just stayed there. Mary Jo says that Joey was a really convincing liar to her, and he always had an answer ready for everything that she threw at him. And she said that all of these answers, they sounded really sincere, so in her head, she didn't have any reason not to believe anything that he was saying. So Mary Jo, she would often, at this point, grow really tired and she would threaten divorce. And Joey would promise her that things would change, and just a way to obviously keep hold of her. Mary Jo then became pregnant with her second child, her daughter Jessica. And she said that she went on keeping up appearances of having the perfect family life, whilst Joey's addiction just got worse. And Mary Jo, she began having panic attacks and blamed all the anxiety on herself. She went and sought help from therapy and helped, but at the same time, she said that Joey was just completely out of control at this point. They then moved back to Massapequa in hopes of a further distance from the house to the body shop would actually help Joey and to keep him at home so she can keep a better eye on him, helping through his addiction. And they managed to buy the new house on the suburbs of Long Island. And Joey said they managed to find a buyer for the house who wanted to buy the house in cash. So this way they could avoid obviously like legal fees and solicitors and all that jazz. Now on the day of the move, they had a meeting with a lawyer, and when Joey told Mary Jo that there was no buyer, he said owed his dealer, and that he actually sold the dealer the deeds to the house. And Joey's father then steps in and he basically just gives him $50,000 out of his own pocket, and this is as a down payment for their new house. And Joey basically lost all the shares in his shop at this point. So like I said, obviously he does go on to inherit the shop, but for this point he's lost any sort of credibility with his father, and I don't really blame him. If I was Mary Jo at this point, I would have kicked him out on the curb there and then, took the children with me, legged it away as far away as I could from this man. So despite all of this, the binges just basically didn't stop with Joey. Mary Jo had him placed into a rehab program, and surprisingly this rehab program actually worked. And Joey completed this, and Mary Jo said that once he was clean, the two of them just went through a sort of a honeymoon phase, if you want to call it that. So May 1991, so back to the time frame that we're going to start talking about this story. So Amy enters the auto shop and she talks to Joey face to face for the first time by herself. And she says what's happened, but she doesn't want her dad to know about what's happened to her car. And Joey tells her to come back the next day and he'll tell her dad that someone had basically sideswept the car and he'll tell her, and just basically tell her to go home, come back the next day. So Amy returns the next day with her dad, and he basically just buys Joey's story. He buys Joey's version of events, and Amy said that her dad thought that, again, Joey was really charming. But he thought he could get the car fixed for a cheaper price. So they end up going to another mechanic store, and this person doesn't do the job properly, which means they have to end up going back to Joey's store to rectify any of the issues. And so obviously, yeah, they take the car back to Joey, and Amy said this back and forth went on for quite some time because Joey was always delaying the repairs, and her dad would keep going back for minor repairs, reportedly. But according to Joey, Amy was basically intentionally damaging her car repeatedly, whichever way Amy was in the shop a lot. And this summer, it became like, in his words, it's become a really recurring thing that she would intentionally damage the car, bring it back to him just on the pretense of seeing him. And eventually, the professional revelations turned into flirting between the two of them. But this didn't develop into anything more until July 1991. So on July the 2nd, Amy brings the car back in to have a sound system installed, and Joey basically just tells her that the job would take a few hours. So Amy said that she would need a ride home. So Joey then calls Elliot to check that this was okay, as he and Roseanne, Amy's mother, they were both at work at this point. And they arrived back at Amy's, and she said that once there, Joey asked her for a tour of the house, and the final stop, if you want to call it that, was Amy's bedroom. And this was the bedroom that she had basically grown up in all her life, so her childhood room. And this is where Amy said that Joey came onto her for the first time, and in her words, she fell in love with Joey and thought Joey was now her boyfriend. And in her words, reportedly, Joey just sort of threw her onto the bed, and it's where they had sex for the first. These are in her words. Obviously, we can appreciate it for what it is. It's abuse. She should never have been in that situation. But I'm just reporting this in what Amy was saying in her mind, what she believed it was at this point. So they have sex for the first time, and she believes that Joey is now her boyfriend. And later that day, Elliot takes Amy back to get her car, and Joey pulls Amy to one side, and he tells her to meet him at the Freeport Motor Inn. This is a motel on the coast of Long Island, and I did Google this place. It's still operating, but really, really bad reputation this particular place has. I didn't scroll through too long, but it's literally every comment that was left on about this place is negative. So this is on the Long Island Harbour, and Amy tells her parents that she's going out with her friends. So she and Joey have the first of 13 motel trips, and this carried on for another 18 months at this point. So she was staying over at hotels or at a body shop, and even sometimes he was staying over at Amy's house. So Amy states that in her book that she wrote, that the first time that they had sex, Joey, like I said, he threw her on the beds and told her not to worry, as he had had a vasectomy. You know, like that's really going to matter to a 16-year-old girl at this point. Um, but hey ho, his biggest worry is about getting her pregnant or whatever. I don't know what was going on in his head for him to even think that that was okay to say. Um, but obviously, she said at this particular time she didn't have any idea what a vasectomy was. So, not long after her 17th birthday in 1991, Amy tells Joey that she needed some money, and Joey actually suggests that she started working as an escort. Um, and Joey basically pushes her into this because, according to Amy, he really got off on hearing about her having sex with other men, and he persuaded her to cut off any relationships with the family that she was close with. So in November 1991, Amy asked Joey if he would leave Mary Jo for her, and Joey basically refuses, and Amy then decides that she's going to stop seeing Joey at this point. And she said that she was really heartbroken, and sadly, according to Amy, like I said, I can't find any sort of medical notes to back this up. But according to Amy, she made an attempt on her life at this point. So not long after this, Joey comes back into Amy's life and he starts telling her how much he hates Mary Jo and that he wanted her dead. He makes comments about Mary Jo having an accident in so many words. So obviously having her killed, but making it look like an possible accident. And Amy begins to actually plan in her mind how she's going to take Mary Jo out of the picture. So two classmates of Amy's, at the trial, they come forward and said that Amy actually offered them $400 and sexual favours in return of them to shoot Mary Jo. But this didn't really stand up in court at the time, so it didn't go any further than that. So January 92, Elliot takes Amy's car back to the body shop, and Joey uses this opportunity to talk to Amy about them. The following month, however, Amy was now in a relationship with another man that she had met in a gym class, but she quickly cheats on him with the gym's owner, Paul Makeley, who was 30 years old at the time. But whilst at the same time of seeing this guy, seeing Paul, she also was still working as an escort and had at this point 3 regular clients that she was seeing on a weekly basis. So at this point she had stopped working for her escort agency and sort of cut out a middleman just to obviously keep all the proceeds to herself. So Amy said that Joey was basically trying to ruin her relationship with Paul, and she decided that she was going to tell Mary Jo everything that had been happening for the past few months. So Amy begins putting plans into action, and she meets 21-year-old Peter Guente, and she basically was going to pay him to get a gun and act out as her getaway driver. They start stealing license plates and they practice putting these on and off of Peter's car to see which one's the best fit to obviously throw the police off the scent. And then sadly the fatal day comes that changes everyone's life in this story. So May 19th, 1992, Amy is basically at her school, but she goes and sees her school nurse quite early during the day and she starts complaining about period cramps. And the nurse writes her a note basically saying that she can go home. So Amy arrives home and she sees that Peter is already waiting for her outside the house. And they take the decoy plates to his car and they start making their way over to Joey's house. So while inside, in Mary Jo's words, so she was in the garden painting when she heard the doorbell ring. She goes to see Amy on her doorstep, and Amy introduces herself as Anne Marie. And when Mary Jo asks her what she wants, Amy asks her if she's Mrs. Butterfuco, so Joey's wife. Mary Jo confirms this, and Amy tells her that Joey is having an affair with her 14-year-old sister. So this just sort of doesn't register with Mary at this point. Like, she's looking at this girl, and bear in mind, obviously, Mary's 37 years old at this point. So, you know, when you're in your 30s, you look at someone who's, I don't know, 18, 19, I mean, I definitely do, and you think that they are a lot younger than what they are saying that they are. I mean, as many of you know, I have spoken about this in a previous video, I do work in a pub. And when I have 18-year-olds coming in to be served and I ID them, I'm looking at the dates and I'm just like, don't look old enough, babe, but the ID's legit and whatnot. But in my head, like, these people look like I did when I was 12. It just, so yeah. When you've got someone on your doorstep, when you're a particular age, you're not going to register and you think, you know, that this person is lying about their age, or that, you know, all them sort of thought process do go through your brain. But I digress. Sorry, I just went on a little bit of a tangent there. So yeah, Amy tells her that Joey's been having sex with her 14-year-old sister. And Mary Jo, like I said, that was obviously a minute ago about the age thing. So Mary Jo said that she was really confused because Amy herself only looked about 14. And so she asks this girl how old she is. So Amy tells her that she's 19. And then Amy then pulls out a t-shirt with Joey's shop logo. And she tells Mary Jo that it's basically proof of the affair, that she found this in her sister's bed. So all of this time, so while Mary's standing there, you know, mere feet away from Amy, she said that she could see Peter waiting in the car at the front. And she initially thought that they were there for an at-home estimate on that particular car. So she said that the whole time, Amy just basically sounded really nervous. And Mary was having a really hard time believing this particular story. And I can kind of believe that, so to speak. You know, how many of us want to believe that our partner is having an affair behind our back, let alone with an underage schoolgirl? Like, in your brain, you don't want to compute it, you don't want to admit that it's true, even though it's the possibility, but it's also the possibility that it is just a whole manufactured story. So Amy starts getting really angry at this point, and she's asking why Mary Jo wasn't upset by the news. And when she handed the t-shirt over, obviously, like I said, she said that she found it in her little sister's bed. So Mary Jo tells her that she's going to give Joey a call to say that she had stopped by. So Mary Jo then says bye, and as she turns her head to open the screen door to go through her front door, Amy pulls out a 25 caliber semi-automatic gun, and she shoots Mary Jo in the side of the head. So she then runs back to the car, and the car speeds away. And Amy states that the shooting was basically just an accident, and that she actually only went to hit Mary Jo with the gun. She said that she struck her twice, and as she went back she struck her, and then when struck her a second time, and that's when the gun fired. But Mary's gunshot wound, this just basically didn't add up to Amy's version of events. Mary Jo said that Amy didn't hit her with the gun at all. So obviously, naturally, the neighbours come to Mary Jo's aid and she's taken to the hospital. So the bullet had entered just above the right side of her jaw, and it basically completely shattered her jawbone. It scrapped her carotid artery in her neck, and it had eventually lodged itself under her brainstem. And it was reported by the doctors and nurses that she actually lost 50% of her blood. So surgeons worked around for 7 hours to repair the damage, but unfortunately they weren't able to retrieve the bullet. But luckily, Mary Jo, she proved what a fighter she was, and she actually survived the attack. So after the shooting, Peter reportedly had taken the gun, and he also took Amy's clothing, and he dumped all this in a sewer. And the pair eventually just went about their day like it was any other day. Doesn't matter. They've just, she just shot someone in cold daylight. Bearing in mind, obviously this was like 11:45 in the afternoon. That's all fine. You just go shopping. So police, they tried to interview Mary Jo, but obviously with the extent of her injury, she wasn't able to talk. So she instead communicated by writing down Amy's description and partly of what Amy had said before slipping in and out of consciousness. So when she said about the t-shirt, police interviewed Joey, and he said that he was intending to give them out to promote his shop, but he had only given one to Amy so far. He said that then Amy had basically given a picture of herself to one of his employees, but this was then a lie. Amy had actually given Joey this picture of herself for him to keep. So police, they take this picture to Mary Jo, and she confirms it's the girl that did shoot her. And Joey then tells the police who Amy really is. So on May 21st, Joey contacts Amy and asks where she is. So Amy says that she's at home, and he feeds this information back to the police. So they actually arrive at the home and they arrest Amy just about as she's about to leave the property to go for a drive. And she's charged with attempted murder at this point. She's questioned for the next 12 hours without a lawyer or her parent present. Bearing in mind the girl was only 17 at this point. Amy's parents then obviously contacted the police to say that she had run away again, because the police had failed to inform them of her arrest. So media, as they always do, a swooping bunch of vultures. They are able to get hold of the story, and it's then when the case is blown into a complete media circus, and Amy is referred to as the Long Island Lolita. And even as far as when she actually spoke about on TV, they barely use her name. They refer to her as the teen hooker. Or in some cases they refer to her as the seductive teen. But a lot of the times, they would just say, oh, Joey and the teen hooker. So 2 weeks later, Amy pleads not guilty to the attempted murder charge, and she's released on a bail set at $2 million. So the police, they know that, obviously she's never going to be able to afford this. So Amy, in her mind, she then sells the rights to this story to anyone who wants to make film or book out of it. And this actually does happen. So the following year, there are three films that are made about this story. I know one of them had Drew Barrymore in it, but I can't remember who the other two actresses were. Um, these are like made for TV movies that I actually got familiar with this case on, but as we can appreciate, they don't report the full extent and the full story of this case. So the judge proceeding over the trial said to call her a 17-year-old girl who lives at home is like saying that John Gotti is just a businessman who lives in New York. So for those of you not familiar, John Gotti was part of the mafia in New York, and I believe he got shot. Can't actually really remember. I need to have another look into that. But if anyone can comment on who John Gotti is and correct me if I'm wrong, feel free. So Amy's defence argued that she really was just a teenage girl, and she was basically in over her head with an old man who took advantage of her. And they put forward that it was Joey's idea to actually kill Mary Jo. And in a way, according to Amy, this was the case. Obviously, as I already said earlier, he was the one that was talking about making Mary Jo disappear and all this. So it was they put forward that it was Joey's idea, and he pressured Amy into shooting her. So Joey ends up denying initially that he had any sort of relationship with Amy. And you know why that is? It's because it's highly illegal, and he doesn't want it to damage his reputation by being branded for what he is, a paedophile. So through investigating, police actually found 13 motel receipts. All of these were signed by Joey, and one was dated July the 2nd, 1991, which was the second time that he actually had sex with Amy. And all of this matched the times and dates that Amy had given the investigators. And one motel employee, he actually came forward personally, and he said that he had in fact checked Joey in on at least 8 times, and handwriting experts confirmed that it was indeed Joey's handwriting on these receipts. But despite all of this evidence coming forward, Mary, she believed in Joey, and she ends up just staying with him, sticking by him. She goes on TV, she defends him, calls out Amy, publicly calls out Amy on TV. And whilst the trial was going on, Amy enters into another really highly inappropriate relationship. And this is with her lawyer, Eric Nyberg. And there's actual footage that you can see if you do a lot of digging, like I did while I was researching this. There is footage of Amy snuggled up and cuddling her lawyer while he's in the court, giving the evidence, putting forward his version of events in defence of Amy, and all the while she's snuggled up next to him like a lovesick puppy. So eventually Amy, she sets up a plea deal with the judge, and on September the 23rd, 1992, she pleads guilty to first degree assault. September 25th, a tape was then leaked to the media, and this was on a show called The Hard Copy, and this showed a conversation between Amy and Paul Makeley. So Paul Makeley was the gym owner that Amy had an affair with, and he was 30. I think she was either 17 or 18 at this point. And in the tape, Amy is talking about her future, and she says that she wants to marry Paul. so that he could visit her in prison for conjugal visits, and says that because it's unconstitutional, she really wanted to challenge the law based on obviously conjugal visits. She then goes on to say that this story will keep my name in the press. I want my name in the press. Why? Because I can make a lot of money. I figure if I'm going through all this pain and suffering, I'm at least getting a Ferrari. So this whole recording, it was set up by Paul, and he was the one who actually sold the tape to hard copy. And after this, Amy, she sadly makes a second attempt on her life, and she was treated at a mental health facility in Long Island. So Amy's sentencing hearing started on December 2nd, 1991, where Mary Jo spoke out and faced Amy for the first time since the shooting. She states that the lasting effects that she had suffered at this point because of the injuries, she said that she was suffering from facial paralysis. She had lost 100% hearing in her right ear. She was having vision problems, and the constant pain due to the bullet, and it was just basically giving her lots of anxiety, and not to mention the fact that any unnatural movement from the bullet itself could actually kill her. She said that this had really affected her two children, who had basically took quite a chunk of their life out of their school lives to help take care of her, and they were basically too scared to leave her side. So Amy apologises for the actions, but she defiantly she just places all of the blame onto Joey. The judge then sentenced Amy to a term of 5 to 15 years imprisonment. And summing it up, the judge says, "For many months, you stalked Joey Buttafuoco like a wild animal, stalks his prey. You were motivated by your lust and passion. You are a walking stick of dynamite with a lit fuse. You are a tragedy and a disgrace to yourself and to society." So the judge was completely on Joey's side. Like, this man manipulated everyone into believing that he was the honourable little victim in this story, when in true reality, Amy was somewhat of a victim, but the real 100% victim was Mary Jo. So after sentencing, they then decided no action would be taken against Joey, as Amy wasn't deemed as a credible witness. And Joey began dragging Mary Jo on a little talk show tour, and this basically just didn't paint the district attorney in a really good light, as this is what I'm saying about this whole case is turning into a media show. So he's dragging her over all over America to relive this story again and again and again. They actually started getting complaints about their decision of letting Joey go. So public were phoning in, and they were complaining to the district attorneys about their poor decision making in letting Joey go as a free man. The district attorney then get wind of Joey bragging about him sleeping with a 16-year-old, and they eventually decide to reopen the case. In April 1993, Joey is charged with 16 counts of statutory rape and 12 counts of sodomy and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. And all of these charges meant that Joey was facing a life sentence. So Joey does what Joey does best, and he tries to enter a plea deal of his own. And this plea deal basically meant that he would only be guilty of one charge of the statutory rape, and his jail term was to be 6 months imprisonment, and he was going to pay a $5,000 fine. So all while Joey was sat in the dock, and he just basically had this insipid smile on his face. He was paraded around in expensive suits, snakeskin boots, and he was actually showing up and leaving the courthouse in a Rolls Royce limo. So he managed to convince Mary Jo that he was still innocent at this point, but he was willing to sacrifice 6 months of his life just to put the story to bed. You know, like any innocent man would do. So he ends up pleading guilty, and he actually only ends up serving 4 months imprisonment. In 1995, Joey is actually arrested again, and this time he's for soliciting a prostitute. And this was reportedly in Los Angeles. So he's then given a 15-day sentence and 2 years probation. He then tells Mary Jo that he was again a victim of an undercover cop, which, you know, obviously they do that in America, but knowing the predatory nature of this man, I have a hard time believing anything that falls out of his mouth at this point. So Mary Jo then falls into a really deep depression because of this constant drama, and Joey was the main focus of this drama, and she soon becomes dependent on her pain medication, and eventually she ends up checking herself into a rehab centre. Mary Jo then she meets Amy's mother, Roseanne, and she confirmed that Amy was basically telling the truth about Elliot and his abuse towards her, and she'd actually finally divorced him a couple of years earlier in 1996. And this was followed by a really sincere apology letter from Amy. So later on during the 90s, so around 98, 99, Amy then has a second trial, and her new lawyer said that the first was basically compromised because of the relationship between her and Eric Nyberg. And this was put down to a conflict of interest. So Amy complained about any treatment she had faced in prison, including sexual assaults by the male staff. And during a visit, Amy's mum, Roseanne, she managed to smuggle away a pair of Amy's knickers, and these tested positive for traces of semen, but a transfer request was still denied at this point. In 1999, after serving 7 years, Amy was actually given parole, and when Judge Ira Wexler shortened her sentence to 10 years, he acted out after discovering that Amy had not appropriately been represented at her original trial. So after her release, Amy becomes a columnist for the Long Island Press, in her own way to tell her story, I suppose. And she ends up releasing a book called If I Knew When, which was released in 2004, and it becomes a bestseller. She then marries Louis Bellera and has 3 children with him, but they end up divorcing a little bit further down the line. I think after 12 years, they divorced in 2015. So during the marriage, you would think Amy would just want to get on with her life out of the media spotlight, but no, Amy ends up becoming a webcam girl, and she also has a short stint as a porn actress. She started her porn career in 2007, and this was after her husband actually sold a particular company, Red Light Districts, Um, he sold them their sex tape that they had made. So Amy, she ends up suing, but during the settlement, she agreed to actually start making promotional appearances through the videos, and she also produced and starred in some of these films. She continued his career up until 2011, but then gave it up. But as of a couple of years ago, she's still working as a webcam model. Mary Jo and Joey, they finally divorced in 2003. I'm guessing Mary Jo just finally, as soon as she regained enough health to live independently, she saw the light and she kicked him out to the curb where he belonged. They both went on to remarry. So Mary Jo ended up marrying Stu Tendler. This was in 2008, but he sadly died a few years later of cancer. And Mary Jo, she went on to have at this point more surgeries just to fix any problems that stem from the bullet. And she released a book called Getting It Through My Thick Skull. And she went on a little press tour of her own just to promote it and talk about her experiences. Joey, obviously, like I said, he also remarried at this point, but I didn't really want to focus on him in this case. And then in 2006, how the producers thought that this was a good idea is absolutely beyond me. In 2006, Entertainment Tonight, they actually featured an article and they actually got Mary Jo and Amy on the show on the same day to talk. So Amy said that she just really wanted to move on, and Mary Jo said that she basically forgave Amy. You know, not for the fact, you know, it's okay that you shot me. In Mary Jo's words, she just didn't want Amy to be continuously living rent free in her head. She really wanted to move on with her life. At this point, she's probably obviously already seeing Paul, and she was probably engaged, so she just wanted to move on with her new husband at this point. And in the same year, a American Women's Football Association, so they were part of a show called the Lingerie Bowl, and this hosted a segment called the Coin Toss. And during this, Amy and Joey are reunited on TV, and it's all set up as a sort of fake date where they go out on little walks through, you know, Central Park and blah blah blah. How the producers thought that this was a good idea is astounding. How they got away with it, but it goes to my earlier point how much of a media circus this story really did turn into. So all of this was going on the TV show while Joey had actually married his second wife in 2005. I'm kind of lost for words, if I'm honest. So that is just basically all the information I could find about this case. It was one where I thought I knew the story, but going into this and researching this, there's a lot of information that I didn't actually know. I'll be interested to know your thoughts and feelings on this case. Do you have anything else that you can add to it? Are you familiar with the story, or I've spoke to a few people in my friendship group who had no idea about Amy Fisher. So I'll be interested to know your take on it. And as always, I'll see you guys next week for more true crime stories with Silhouette. Stay safe, have a good week.